fellow homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. I am making something tonight that I only make usually once a year with my own bell peppers, which is stuffed peppers. Bell peppers are a little bit tricky to grow, and a lot of times they get a bit of sunburn on them. And a lot of times they're kind of misshapen the way this one is, where they don't sit quite flat. And so, you know, if you're making stuffed peppers, you need them to stand up. You kind of want them to be good sized so that you get a lot of stuffing in there. They can be kind of fiddly. And homegrown ones are, you know, the classic reason there's so much waste in the produce industry, because homegrown ones very rarely look perfect. And so I usually wait until I have a good flush of peppers where a lot of them are coming in, and I pick out the 4 or 5 best ones in order to make this recipe. And so that's what we're doing tonight. These peppers are called bullnose, and they are an old heirloom variety that was grown at Monticello by Thomas Jefferson, so they've been around for a very long time. They're a really nice pepper. They're sweet. They have a nice thick wall. And I grow them every year, mostly because I just absolutely love the story. I also grow a variety of sweet pepper called Carmen that is a bullhorn style, so more long and skinny, less round. They are much less prone to sunburn, and they actually are even sweeter than these bell peppers. And so I love them for eating, and I freeze a lot of them, but I just keep growing this bell as well at the same time, just because I really love it. And it's really fun to have stuffed peppers once in a while, so that's what we're doing. The recipe calls for a can of diced tomatoes because we're at the end of tomato season, and I am desperately trying to stuff the last of my tomatoes into a jar. You may hear the pressure canner going in the background. I have some pressure canning going for some tomatoes, some chili base that I'm making. I am not going to use canned tomatoes. I'm going to use fresh tomatoes because I am definitely trying to use up the last of my fresh tomatoes. My knife is a little bit dull here. If you guys have never seen this, this is a inexpensive knife sharpener that Cooks Illustrated, America's Test Kitchen, really liked, oh gosh, a long time ago now. And I bought one, and I now own 3 or 4 of them because they really do work. They will not redeem a knife that is seriously messed up, but if you're just trying to put an edge back on a knife, they work quite well, and they are, you know, it's $10 instead of 30 or 40 for a better quality professional electric knife sharpener. So yeah, it's worth having one of those around, and see how much easier that goes through that tomato now. In fact, I even saw one just recently at an estate sale that I was at, and I bought one for a friend of mine. I bought it there and gave it to her because her knives are terribly dull, and we often cook together, and she's pretty new to cooking, and she doesn't sometimes realize how important that kind of stuff is. So I need, I think it's 14.5 ounces is what it called for. I'm just going to cut these up and see where I end up here. If I'm anywhere between a cup and a cup and a half, I'll be happy. This is the tail end of these little round tomatoes. Are normally quite a bit larger, but at the end of the season, the soil kind of runs out of gas, and I'm not excited about putting a lot of fertilizer on this late in the season. And so these are either Brandywine or Mortgage Lifter, or a really lovely tomato that's less known called Canner Whole, K-A-N-N-E-R-H-O-E-L-L. And Canner Whole is a Seed Savers Exchange seed, which is where I originally got it, and it's definitely one of my must-have tomatoes. It's when it's in its prime and super happy, it's typically about a baseball to softball size, so it's not a huge heirloom beefsteak, but really productive, beautiful little round red tomato, or maybe pink, I can't remember, and just really nice for if you're going to dry tomatoes, and it's very good eating, or very tasty. Yeah, so Canner Whole, look at that if you're looking for new varieties of tomatoes to grow next year that are in the slicing rather than the giant 1 pound or over range. I love how seed catalogs are all over the place in terms of how they describe their tomatoes. It drives me crazy. Like sometimes they'll say, 3-ounce tomatoes, and sometimes they say 2-inch tomatoes, and sometimes they say, baseball sized. And it's like, I wish that would be more standardized, because it's really hard when you're like, I don't know how much a 3-inch tomato weighs, and I don't know, how big an 8-ounce tomato is, or a 12 or a 16-ounce tomato is. So yeah, some kind of standardization with pictures would be really helpful, where they call them all the same measurement. All right, so what I've got here, yeah, that's just about perfect, actually. That's about 14 ounces. And they are suggesting draining, saving the juice, and then that gets spooned over the top. I think what I'm gonna do, since these are fresh, is I'm just gonna throw them in the microwave for a couple minutes to soften them up so that we get a little more juice going for that purpose. These are really handy. I've bought these looking for alternatives to plastic wrap, and I really like them a lot. We'll give that a good go. Wash off our very messy cutting board. And the thing about stuffed peppers is, honestly, it's a very forgiving recipe, and you can stuff them with whatever you like. There really are no rules. The traditional is some kind of meat and then some kind of starch. And so it's pretty common to see rice as an addition, but not always. You could do potatoes if you wanted, or something else. Rice is typical. But other than that, yeah, some kind of meat, some kind of starch, probably some tomatoes, herbs and spices, and then cheese is also really common. So that's kind of the standard recipe. I have a recipe, gosh, I think it's from Epicurious, I'll have to look, that I literally copied out of the magazine from the library back before the internet was everywhere. And so I used to go to the library and just pick up my favorite magazines. This is back when I was a college student and I had no money. And so I would just hang out in the library for a couple of hours and read through my favorite magazines, and then put them back on the shelf. And then if there was a recipe that I thought looked good, I would make a photocopy of it for 10 cents and bring it home. And so I actually have a stuffed pepper recipe that's from that as well. And it was actually a reader submitted recipe. And I think it's Chris's stuffed bell peppers. It has mushrooms in it, and my husband is definitely not a mushroom eater, and so I'm not gonna do that, but I like to look at it in terms of suggested herbs and spices, because I have made it before and it is quite good. And his does not have any rice in it, but we are gonna put a little rice in ours tonight. I'm doing a riff between that recipe and the one from Cooks Illustrated, or one of the, it's Cooks Illustrated or Cook's Country or America's Test Kitchen, I forget which magazine it came from, but they have a really base standard recipe. The one that was the reader submitted one, he uses Italian sausage, and I think that's a great idea for adding a bunch of flavor, and so I am gonna use an Italian sausage in these. And what I did, because we have a lot of pork in our freezer right now, a lot of ground pork, I actually just kind of threw together my own, where I just thawed out a pound of pork and added some spices to it to make my own homegrown Italian sausage. I am not a fennel fan, and so I actually just kind of riffed on a basic Italian sausage recipe but left out the fennel. And I know that makes no sense, because that is the defining characteristic of an Italian sausage, is the fennel. But I also like the spice and the rest of it, and so we just leave out the fennel and do the rest. And so it'll be not quite Italian sausage tonight. Obviously, because we're stuffing these, we want to keep them whole as much as we can. I'm going to just leave this last one and not cut the top off yet. I'm not sure how much filling I'm going to end up with here. And my peppers are often a little bit smaller than some of these recipes use, and so I often have a little bit of extra filling. you know what? I'm pretty confident I'm gonna need that. I'm just gonna make an executive decision here that that's gonna be necessary. I love growing peppers. Peppers are my favorite, even above tomatoes. Peppers are my favorite thing to grow. So many different kinds, so many different uses, so many different flavors from all over the world. The recipes I have don't call for this, but I'm actually just gonna take the tops and throw them into this recipe as part of it, because why not? I don't want to waste it. And I have so many peppers in my freezer right now, frozen from this year. I don't need to add to that. And I've got some extra bell peppers that I haven't used yet, that will also probably end up in my freezer. And then I've got some end of season ones that are still out in the garden. So I'm gonna try to use these rather than freeze them, because I don't need any more right now. Okay. So what we're gonna do here is saute some onions and those pepper tops. I'm just using a good glug of olive oil. All right, got our pan heated up. We're gonna add a cup of onion. And I happen to have this already diced because I needed a lot of onion for the canning projects I was doing. And I'm so sick of cutting up onions. And so I just cut up every scratch and dent onion I had left so that I would not have to do it anymore. And so those are ready to go, and then I'm just gonna freeze the rest. And that is a big, big pepper. Let's see if we can get, there we go, nice. My oven is preheating to 350. I'm gonna put a small sprinkle of kosher salt in there. Sweat these down. I'm just gonna soften these up before I add in the Italian sausage. Yeah, it's been a big canning day. I've probably processed about 10 pounds of tomatoes. Got them peeled and doctored up and canned in jars. I made, I'm doing a riff on a recipe and I'm pressure canning it. I love shakshuka. You guys have seen that recipe that I have for that. So basically I did a shakshuka sauce that I pressure canned. So we'll see how that works with the peppers and the onions and the paprika. Basing it off of a recipe that was half tomatoes and half celery. And this ended up being way more tomatoes than onions and peppers. But I figured the processing time on that had to be good, if not overkill, for what I was doing. And so I went ahead and did that and then pressure canned it. And it's nice and watery, so not a ton of, I'll cook it down when I make the shakshuka, when I actually poach the eggs in it. So not a lot of density issues. So hopefully it'll come out great. So that was one batch of pressure canning. And then the second batch that I've got in there now, turn that back up just a little bit. The second batch is basically a chili base. And it's based on a Mexican tomato sauce recipe in one of the Ball canning books. And instead of doing a cup of onion, or 2 cups of onion, I ended up doing a cup of onion and a cup of peppers. And that was based on the fact that looking up pH for onions versus peppers, peppers are almost always more acidic. And so I felt like that was an acceptable change to make, because if anything, I made it more acidic by adding peppers instead of all onion. And then I opted to, basically I added the spices to it that I would normally add to chili. And so basically made a chili base with peppers, onions, and spices, and then I went ahead and I'm pressure canning that as well. Even though the original recipe was water bath can, because I had the pressure canner up and going, I figured why not, and so I just am throwing it in there as a pressure canning project instead. A note on pressure canning, this is just a random aside, but I see a lot of YouTubers who are talking about sometimes they'll opt to not pressure can because it's too much work, because they feel like they have to watch it like a hawk. Get one of these weights that is multi-pieced so that you can set it with a 15-pound weight, a 10-pound weight, or a 5-pound weight. And then as long as that weight is wiggling, which is mine, is you can see it's wiggling just a little bit, so I know it's at pressure. You don't have to watch the gauge. I can sit on the couch and be watching TV and hear that this is jiggling. And plus, once you've done it a couple of times, you kind of get a sense for where that setting is on your stove as well, because you don't want to have it going full bore. You can turn it down a little bit. But yeah, to me, that takes no additional paying attention any more than doing a water bath canning project would, because I can hear if that's jiggling without having to watch it like a hawk, and I'm not paying attention to the actual dial gauge at all. All right, so I think these are cooked down enough, softened enough. I'm going to add in my pork, and this is just 1 pound. And I put this together this morning and then threw it back in the fridge. So it's been kind of, all those herbs and spices that are in here have been getting happy over the last 6 or 8 hours. And so hopefully this will be nicely flavored. All right, we'll get that going, get some browning on there. And we'll be back in a minute when we're ready to add more stuff. You can see we've got some nice browning and going in here. We're about where we want to be. This sausage recipe that I threw together has a little bit of sugar in it, and that's going to help things brown. Yum. Okay, I'm going to turn that off. And then I need some rice. This is brown rice that I just cooked in the rice cooker. I've had this little funky cheap rice cooker forever, and it does a good job. It's simple. I'm not a big fan of Instapot rice, and this I made a little bit more than what it actually called for, and so I'm just gonna kind of eyeball this and see where we end up here. And the original recipe called for 12 ounces of beef, and then the other recipe called for like 1.5 pounds, and so I just have 1 pound of pork here. So I'm just, again, this is definitely, I'm just using recipes as rough guidelines for what I might want to do here, and riffing on it from there. We don't need to, as long as it tastes good, we don't need to be really exacting here. I am going to add a little bit of Worcestershire sauce. It's a nice note of acidity, not to mention complexity, because there's all kinds of other stuff in there, from garlic to, I don't know, raisins, whatever. I'm not sure what's in Worcestershire. All right, let's see how that tastes. Yeah, that's good. Honestly, I don't think it needs much else. So we got our tomatoes drained. I need 1/4 cup of reserve juice. And I'm just gonna toss the rest of that. I gotta tell you guys, I'm just so over tomatoes right now. I know I will not be thinking that in February, but at this point, yeah, not gonna save 1/2 cup of tomato juice right now. Oh, and that's what I forgot to mix into this. We gotta add the tomatoes. That's important. I'm going to turn that back on and just heat this through. These aren't going to need much. I nuked them in the microwave for a couple of minutes, and so they're soft. That really is tasty and simple and doesn't need a thing. All right, I'm going to stop fiddling with that. put that on low, let it heat for just a little bit. To my 1/4 cup of tomato juice, I need a 1/4 cup of ketchup. This is homemade ketchup that I've been trying to use up for years because I really didn't love the recipe. It's good in things, but I really don't like it just as, like, you know, on French fries. It's got, the spice mix in it is wrong. I want it to taste like Heinz, and it doesn't. So I have a whole other tomato recipe or tomato ketchup recipe bookmarked and have had it bookmarked for years. And I just don't feel like I should make it until I use up this one. So I'm not there yet. Okay, so 1/4 cup of ketchup. And the original recipe from America's Test Kitchen has you blanch the peppers. I don't think that's necessary. They're trying to make sure that they're cooked well. That's way too fiddly for me at this point in the day. I've spent the entire day in here cooking and I don't want to blanch anything, so I'm just not going to do that part. I'm not worried about them not being perfectly soft. Okay, so there's our sauce. And then I need about 1 1/4 cups of Monterey Jack cheese, which is more than half of this bar. They call for 5 ounces. 4 ounces is about a cup, so we're just gonna eyeball that, call it good. My least favorite thing in the world, hand grating cheese. It would probably help if I had a better cheese grater. This one used to have a top on it and the top fell off and I just didn't ever see the point in replacing it since the rest of it worked just fine. The other thing I didn't put in here is some black pepper, which is never a bad thing. All right, let's give this one more stir and get these in the oven. And you can spice these up as much as you like too, so you can add hot sauce to this. Or you could use like some chilies. I'm gonna go pretty mild today, but feel free to play with that however you like. You could make this with ground turkey or ground chicken. Instead of pork, obviously ground beef. You could do buffalo. You could do one of those veg crumbles where it's a vegetarian option made from soy protein. So yeah, lots of different ways to riff on this recipe that are all gonna be good. All right, let's stuff our peppers. Turn that off. And these conveniently are holding each other up. If you are using a pan where that is not the case or your peppers aren't cooperating, you can take wads of tinfoil and just like stick them around the base and it will help them remain upright if they're not sitting nicely for you. I'm trying not to spill too much of this into the bottom of the pan because anything I spill down there is likely gonna just burn. And this is where a bigger spoon versus a smaller spoon becomes an issue. All right, there's a lot of little nooks and crannies in there, so I'm gonna kind of pack that down. Well, we might have done okay on the amount of filling here. I'm trying hard not to scrape a metal spoon heavily across my nonstick pan here. The other thing would be good in this instead of rice would be quinoa. I could see quinoa being a really nice addition to this. I was actually supposed to mix that cheese into these, was the recipe. I'm not gonna worry about that. Again, there's no right or wrong to how to do this. So I'm just gonna top them, and then if I have extra leftover cheese, we'll just use it for something else. I don't need all of those calories anyway. We're just gonna be generous with our cheese topping here since we didn't mix it in. And we're gonna bake this for 25 to 30 minutes, or until everything looks like it's heated through. I can't wait, I'm hungry. Messy kitchen is mostly cleaned up. Let's see how dinner's looking. Oh yeah, beautiful. You know, I think maybe 5 more minutes. All right, I think we're gonna call it good here. Oh yeah. That's what I was looking for, just a little bit more browning on there. Those look fantastic. So, homegrown bell peppers, homegrown onions, local pork, really quick, simple meal, a lot of hands off with the baking. Really nice, you know, all your nutrition is right there. And then you get some lovely cheese on top to make it super yummy. So give stuffed bell peppers a try. I understand these freeze very well. I have never done that, but you could always try freezing them as well. I've seen that done with other cooks. So thanks for watching, Tribe, and get cooking.